Hello and welcome to the Change Makerz podcast, a podcast about activism, politics, and Gen Z. I'm your host for this week, Ryan Caricofe, and today I am talking with Dee. Dee, how are you doing today?
Hanging in. How are you?
I'm all right. Well, it's great to have you. So first off, you are a bodybuilder, correct?
I am.
What does it mean to be a bodybuilder?
Well, I suppose, do you want the literal answer or like the emotional answer?
More of the emotional answer.
Sure. It means pursuing a betterment of yourself in a way that's very practical and tangible. We always talk about working through our problems or whatever, but it's kind of hard to really see those results, and sometimes you don't know if you're moving forward or backwards. But with bodybuilding, well, you look in the mirror and, if your biceps are that much bigger or if you're lifting that much more weight, congratulations, you did it, and it feels good.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience as being a trans bodybuilder?
Sure. So I'm part of a league known as the International Association for Trans Bodybuilders and Powerlifters. It's a very small org based out of Atlanta, and it was essentially created by trans people in the sport who, rightfully so, wanted a safe space for us that wouldn't be subject to some of the issues it presented in the broader space. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to compete yet. I was going to do that last calendar year, but unfortunately I had to get a wisdom tooth taken out about a month prior, so that put a damper on things. I'm hoping to do maybe next year. It's, I will say, probably the greatest experience since I haven't competed yet would be the experience in local gyms, right? Because those are not special trans exclusive spaces. Mm-hmm. Those are for everyone. And to say the least, it's kind of hard to miss me. I stand out, and people take notice. What they think of me, y'all never know because they don't speak to me. But, it's interesting to get all those looks because they don't expect to see a trans person there.
Can you talk a little bit what it's like to be, I don't know if you're the only trans person there, but to
Usually.
be a trans person in a sport primarily dominated by cis athletes?
Sure, yeah. So, like I said, on one hand, it is really nice to have that wonderful trans inclusive space. It is strictly for trans competitors, of course. It's separated by masculine aligned and feminine aligned, but it's still just for us. And that really means that I haven't had to deal with a lot of the negative sides of dealing with such a cis-dominated space. But on the other hand, in those gyms that I mentioned prior, it is primarily dominated by, cis white men. And, of course, a lot of the time, it's just people coming in to just do, fitness stuff. And that's wonderful. But then you get, the bodybuilder people who, you can't miss them. You visibly see them, right? And they're usually the only people who are in that gym lifting as much as me or more than me. And there's a thing in gym culture where you kind of take notice of the people who are kind of at your level. And so, I look over and I see one of them lifting something really heavy, and then they look back at me and they notice I'm lifting something heavy, and I always get a look. Every single time. It's this look that kind of says, wouldn't expect that out of you. I don't take that too personally, because they're not, it's just a look. But it could definitely scare off a lot of people. And I would not blame any of my fellow trans folk for being scared off by that. It can be pretty intimidating, especially when it's a cis white guy who's built like the size of a house.
How'd you get involved with the International Association of Trans Bodybuilders and Powerlifters?
I found them online, and then I paid a membership fee, and now I'm part of them. It was that simple. Some larger orgs have entry requirements, but they don't. In the name of inclusivity, I suppose, and also just their small size. I assume you also want to know how I got into bodybuilding personally?
Why not?
So that was part of my transition, interestingly. A lot of trans feminine people in the space, not all, but a sizable number, are people who were into the sport before transition. And that's all great and wonderful, but mine was a bit of a different story where I was attempting to transition, and um, as I'm sure you're well aware, medical transition is not cheap. And even though I've had access to some of those kind of things, definitely many of them were outside of my reach. And I had a friend who kept telling me, Dee, you should get into bodybuilding. There's a lot you can do with it, and I think you'd really enjoy it. And, I was kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm trans. Why do I want to look more masculine or something, right? And they kept pestering me until I finally said, fine, I'll do it. And I fell in love with it because not only can I achieve some of my transition goals, I'm doing it all myself. It's not a magic pill. It's not a magic surgery. It's hard work. And there's something really rewarding about that, about putting in the work to see, like, every day you go to the gym and you look more like the person you're trying to be. And after seeing that for the first time, kind of couldn't go back.
Not to shift the tone too far down.
Oh, you're fine.
Over the last few days and last few months even, there have been a lot of political commentators, let's say, that have been coming to college campuses such as JMU to talk about trans people, namely trans women in sports. As someone who would be directly impacted by these conversations, how do you feel about them? Do you think that they have adequately included trans athletes in these discussions?
Are you talking about the conservative pundits talking about trans people in sports? Or
sure.
Okay, I wasn't sure because in case it's not obvious, they're not fans of us. For myself personally, because it's such a small organization, not in a major spotlight, nor is it accredited by some sort of national organization, it's not going to impact me personally or specifically in any meaningful way. Just because, like, it's a trans-inclusive space, we're kind of separate from a lot of that. But for my peers who would aspire to compete on the more cis-aligned spaces or just broadly, I think I watched an interview once that very much put it in a perspective I like, that it's a conversation being dominated by political opinions when it really should be dominated by sports scientists. As much as I have my political views and the pundits have theirs, this isn't something that can be solved on the basis of ideology. We're talking about fairness in a sport, which, everybody has their opinions on what qualifies as fair, but one would hope that the people who would know best would be the scientists. And by and large, the evidence shows that in the vast majority of sports, there may be some exceptions that I don't know about, but once a trans woman is on estrogen, the vast majority of any sort of correlative benefits that she gets from being assigned male at birth is next to nothing. The only variable would be her height. And even then, there are cis women who are taller or shorter than each other. If you tried to exclude people based on that, that would be a whole separate series of problems. So ultimately, if people on both sides of the aisle in this sense would just listen to the scientists, I think that would probably be the best way to go about it. Because I do hear people on my side of the aisle who kind of say, well, in the name of inclusivity, we should just let everyone in, regardless of transition status, regardless of all these things. And although I think there should definitely be a space for all of us, hence the international org that I'm part of, I think in those cis-dominated spaces, it would just be entirely unfair. Being on estrogen versus not is kind of the reverse equivalent of being on testosterone, in like a bodybuilding or a steroid context. And that's banned. Well, in some orgs it is, but in those orgs that it's banned, it should go kind of both ways, and I do stand by that. But at the same time, the idea that a transgender woman who is on estrogen and has been on it for over a year, the science shows that there is just no difference in athletic performance materially. And if you don't pay attention to sports scientists, why do you even care about the sport?
So recently there have been certain laws passed throughout various state houses throughout the country, including one in Kentucky that banned all trans athletes from participating in school sports, which, for the sake of Kentucky, included only 2 people for that entire law. So that's one side of just completely banning trans people from sports. Mm-hmm. And there's another opinion that I've heard of people who want a third league for all sports, for all trans people, and then cis people that have varying hormone levels, either more testosterone than average or less testosterone than average, for more masculine.
Right, of course, yeah. That's interesting. On one hand, I very much like the idea of having the third as an option. That is quite literally the reason I'm part of the org I'm part of. But on the other hand, I think that may be a dangerous road in the context of policing people based on hormone levels, because hormone levels don't tell the whole story. They don't tell the trials and tribulations that athlete has gone through to get to the skill level they are. It sort of reduces athletic performance to a predetermined number, or a number that you can artificially increase. That doesn't seem like a very good sports culture to me. I'm not the sportiest person in the world. I'm only very recent in the grand scheme to the world of bodybuilding. But as for bodybuilding in particular, it's an aesthetic-based sport. You know, it's not like powerlifting or something very numbers-driven. It's all about what you're visually able to do. And with that in mind, there is a need for this separation, because, I'm sorry, a person on estradiol versus not, or a person who's transmasculine who's on testosterone versus not, the levels of physique performance they're going to be able to achieve are night and day. You cannot mix them up. It's peak athletes, of course. Beginners, obviously, it's a little different, but that is something where it is an absolute necessity to divide it by hormone status. Simply in the context of if you're taking something or not, right? But in the context of sports more broadly, there are some sports where, you know, obviously hormone levels can play a factor, but it just seems so far removed. I'll put it another way. Most sports don't have a steroid problem the same way that bodybuilding does, because bodybuilding and hormone levels are much more closely linked than other sports. Not to say there weren't cases. I know that there's some historical cases of like baseball players doing it and stuff, but broadly speaking, it's I'll put it this way: it's more heavily regulated,
and the sport does not. Most of those other sports don't suffer from that, whereas bodybuilding, obviously for the health of the competitors, regulating that is a good thing, but at the same time, a lot of what we understand today to be bodybuilding physiques simply cannot be achieved naturally. For most, even cis men. You look at Arnold Schwarzenegger or any of the greats of the golden era, and none of that was achieved naturally. So there has to be a balance there, whereas with other sports, they're about human performance. They're not about achieving some weird aesthetic or some sort of objective vision of beauty. So for me, I would simply say that they're going in the wrong direction. I think they're policing hormones too much.
In regards to this wave of anti-trans legislation, has that impacted you either professionally, socially, or mentally?
How much time do you have?
Yeah, it's just a small question.
Well, to put it lightly, the wave, or tidal wave, you might say, of trans hysteria has been a motivating force on much of my entire life at this point. It is a somewhat unfortunate coincidence that I started transitioning right when the seeds of this were being sown. But nonetheless, it has definitely played a major impact in, I wouldn't say my social life in the sense that because we're on a college campus, it's a little bit insulated from all of that, particularly a more liberal-leaning college campus. If I was in a more conservative campus, that would probably be an issue, but less of that, but more in the context of I guess I'll just put it bluntly, is I'm a politically involved person. I'm someone who pays attention to a lot of it. I'm a person who reads history. I am planning to be out of the country before the 2024 election because I fear for my own life.
With this wave of legislation, what would you say would be the most helpful course of action for those who would say that they are cis allies of trans people?
For allies, I mean, there's a lot of very basic steps that I would say that they should have been doing prior to this wave. I think, obviously, taking people at face value and respecting them and their identities is kind of a bare minimum of human decency, although a shocking number of people seem to think otherwise. I suppose, in specific context to the wave of legislation, I would simply say to understand that our fear is not hysteria. There's hysteria about us, but we're not. Okay, I'll put it like this. About a year ago, I kind of saw this coming. Saw the writing on the wall. And a handful of cis allies who were very close to me sort of told me, Dee, you're being overdramatic. You sound like my parents who are scared of everything they see on Fox News. You're being hysterical. And I said, maybe you think that, but trans people's lives have always been the first to be put in the line of fire by any sort of extreme right-wing political ideology. The very first book burning that the Nazis did was of a University of Gender Studies. So I don't take things lightly when things start moving in that direction. And now that things are escalating, those same cis allies are going, Dee, wow, crap, you saw this coming. I'm so sorry. I didn't believe you. And now I'm kind of sitting here like, yeah, well, maybe you could have helped me a little earlier, make my plans and get everything sorted out, but you didn't because you didn't believe me. So I guess right now, if I were to sort of address the audience directly, as it were, I would say, is there's a trans person in your life who is visibly trans and they're not going to be not visibly trans in the near future? If they're concerned for their safety, if they're concerned for their very livelihood, if they're concerned for their rights and their autonomy, for the love of whatever God you believe in, do not doubt them. Do not say that they're being hysterical or overdramatic. We are not. We have been in the line of fire for the last couple thousand years, if you really want to get down to it. So, yes, that's what I would say to do.
Well, Dee, I really much appreciate your time and you coming down here today. It's been great having you here.
Been my pleasure.
That's all I have for you today, and we'll see you all next time.